It was another wild week of fantasy football we're just coming off of, guys, and we discussed this last week on the buy low video. At this point in the season, we're in the second half of the fantasy football season. It's really hard to trick your league mates about who's got the right value and whose value is less than. It's hard to trick people on value of players at this point in the fantasy football season. When we're making trades, we need to be very meticulous about who is involved in the trade while acknowledging that there are some buy low opportunities at this point during the fantasy football season still. So we're going through 5 buy low trade targets to get before week 9 fantasy football, and I'm going to present trades that I would offer in exchange for those players. And there aren't many fantasy football YouTubers who are doing that for you, and I'm also filming this at midnight on Sunday night, so please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. It is greatly appreciated, guys. So let's go ahead, dive right into these guys right here. So the first guy I've got up here, he's on the IR right now, and I believe that this is the type of player that could put you over the top and have you win a fantasy football season. We've got Devonta of the Miami Dolphins here. Let me be 100% clear on this one. You've got to be in a really good position to make this trade happen. You cannot be 2-5. You cannot be 3-5. You probably shouldn't even be 4-4 in this situation here. You need to be either 1 loss, it's got to be maybe 2 losses, or 3 losses max, and you have a good trajectory. You've got guys who have already come back from injury, or you've just got some players that are evolving into their skin. And at this point, you gotta have someone who's gonna put you over the top. Devonta can absolutely do that for you. First of all, he got put on the IR a couple of weeks back. Now, he's been on the IR for 3 weeks now. He's missed 3 games so far in the IR stint. So that means he's going to miss at least 1 more. Now, of course, I haven't seen many updates since A-Chain has been on IR, other than the fact that when he was originally put there, they said that they did expect him back after that 4-game window right here. Here's what we do know. What we do know is what he has done already in the season. He was incredible in the short stint that we got from Devonta. And what we need to look at here is since A-Chain has been gone, what has Miami done offensively, specifically with the run game? When we can look at it, over the past 2 weeks with Raheem Mostert, he's getting roughly the same amount of volume as he had been getting with Devonta before A-Chain went down. Like, he's getting around, 15 carries per game, around 18 opportunities per game. He's getting roughly that same workload, but he hasn't been as efficient. Now, why is that? Well, the reason why is because Miami is missing that majorly explosive piece in Devonta, and Raheem Mostert is wearing down. He's an older guy, so they want another guy like Devonta who is super explosive to take a load off Raheem Mostert, and we've already seen how well they work together. When A-Chan comes back, he's going to open things back up for both Raheem Mostert, and he's going to absolutely make a massive difference on your fantasy football team. So as far as rest of season rankings go, he's my running back 14 for the rest of the season. He would be higher if he was not injured right now. Here's a move I would make. I would send someone, package together a Jordan Addison with a James Cook. Target Devonta, maybe get a Michael Pittman on top of that. Because what you're doing here is you're selling off a Jordan Addison who's done extremely well in fantasy football so far without Justin Jefferson. Now he's got a quarterback issue as well. Kirk Cousins not coming back because of an Achilles injury. And then you could also sell someone on a James Cook because the guy gets basically the same workload, even more so than Devonta does, but he's on just as good of a team, basically. So I love this idea here. Devonta, the simple reality here is that he's just a player that can absolutely win you a fantasy football league. The next guy I'm moving on to right here is a guy that also has got an injury designation. Now, he ended up playing in week 8, but it wasn't good. And that guy was Jerome Ford for the Cleveland Browns. So here's the thing. We're going to date back to a couple weeks ago when Nick Chubb got injured. And Jerome Ford was going to be the biggest waiver wire pickup. And I said to people, I said, I'm not big on Jerome Ford. Do not spend a ton of fab on Jerome Ford. It's crazy. Well, I was wrong. I was wrong, and I've admitted that. And I do think he's a good option. And right now, I think he's a good buy low candidate. And let me tell you why. After week 8 performance right here. So we gotta bring this with context. He came into the week with an injury designation. He wasn't practicing. In fact, early reports were after week 7 was that he was going to miss at least 1 to 2 weeks with that injury he sustained in week 7. So he came into this week, injury designation, not expected to play. Well, he ends up playing. He ends up practicing late in the week, and he ends up being able to play, but he's clearly not 100%. If you watch that game, even with the touches that he did get, he wasn't very good. He was clearly hobbled and bothered by that injury, and the workload was much lighter than it had been compared to the first several weeks of him as a starter. So it was clear he was not 100%, and the Browns knew it here. Now, here's the reason I love this buy low opportunity. We all have people in at least one league that just don't pay attention very much, especially at this point in the season. At this point in the season, people are getting a little bit worn down with the fantasy football grind that we do every single day. So they probably weren't paying attention to the context leading up to the week. They probably didn't know that Jerome Ford was dealing with an injury and that it was probably going to limit him if he did play. And so when they saw him active, they were just like, okay, I'm just going to shove him out there. And when he didn't produce like they thought he would, like he had been over the past few weeks, they're like, well, maybe he's just not as good anymore. Those are the people you want to take advantage of in this situation because we've seen it when he's been healthy. The guy has been performing very well. He's got a good offensive line blocking for him. He's running behind that offensive line, and he's also getting pass catching work as well. He's my running back 21 rest of season. So when I'm looking at other running back 2s in his range, the other low-end running back 2s or high-end running back 3s, I would send someone like a Ramondre Stevenson and Alexander Madison or a Brian Robinson for him straight up. Or if you want to package together, package one of them with like a Terry McLaurin type, coming off a big week 8 performance for a guy like Jerome Ford and maybe a Zay Flowers and that type of deal as well. I think Jerome Ford's a good buy low candidate right now. I advise my audience to buy him on the very cheap right now from someone who's not paying attention. The next guy on the list right here is going to be a guy that probably is not going to sound like a super buy low guy. And again, at this point in the season, we're looking for specific deals in this late in the fantasy football season. I've got Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks right now. I think it's a good buy low in certain instances right now. So I've been big on him for basically the entire season. I've been a big Kenneth Walker guy from the get-go, really. When I did my rest of season running back rankings video on Friday leading up to week 8, I said Kenneth Walker was a top 5 rest of season running back for me in fantasy football this year. This is the thing. He was averaging 18 carries per game leading into week 8. Now, the last 2 weeks, what we need to look at with his production specifically is he's not been as good for people in fantasy football from a half PPR perspective over the past several weeks. So let's look at those last 2 weeks on a half PPR standpoint. So in week 7, he had 12.1 fantasy points in week 7. Then in week 8, he had 7.5 fantasy points. Now, those are not terrible numbers, right? They're not numbers that are like Alexander Madison level numbers where it's like bottom end RB2. That's not what we're talking about here. But when you're talking about a top 5 running back in fantasy football, which he was for several weeks leading into the season and during the season, Kenneth Walker's a little bit disappointing over the last 2 weeks. But here's the important context that you need to remember. He had 26 carries in week 7, and then he had 8 carries in week 8. And now, why was that? Now, the reason is because he had a lighter workload this week because if you remember, leading into week 8, he had an injury designation for the first beginning of the week. He was not practicing. It looked like at one point we would see Zach Charbonnet leading the backfield against the Cleveland Browns this week. Well, then Kenneth Walker practiced on Friday, avoids injury designation. Everybody forgets that he had an injury, right? Well, he had that injury leading into the week. So there's no wonder to me why he handled lesser of a workload this week. Now, here's the thing. People still like Kenneth Walker. You're not fooling anybody and getting a situation like, I'll trade you Alexander Madison or Ramondre Stevenson for Kenneth Walker. You're not getting that type of deal, and I am not telling you that you're getting that type of deal. But he's not going to be viewed as a top 5 running back in fantasy football after the week 8 performance. And I told you the reason why he still is. The only reason that his volume was down last week in week 8 is because he came into the week with an injury designation. That's not going to last. He's going to be just fine moving forward. And honestly, here's the deal. Like, this is the type of trade you're going to have to make. I love Breece Hall. And Breece Hall, I was big on him in week 8, and it came to fruition. But I would send Breece Hall for him straight up. Breece Hall is not a top 5 fantasy running back rest of season like Kenneth Walker is because of the offensive upside with Seattle compared to the Jets. I would also send a guy like Saquon Barkley in exchange for Kenneth Walker. Maybe a high-end wide receiver 3 like Rashee Rice or Jackson Smith-Njigba in addition to Kenneth Walker for Saquon Barkley. Like I said, you're not trading him for some running back 2 who's some run-of-the-mill running back 16, 17 area. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to pay a decent price for him, but the reality is with those other guys, I don't think they have top 5 upside rest of season, and it may not sound like a buy low, as I said, but when you look back and he's a top 5 running back by the end of the season, it's going to feel like he was a buy low guy at this moment. Isaiah Pacheco is number 4 right here. Let me tell you this. I've been big on Isaiah Pacheco literally for weeks now. You guys know this, and really it's been weird how he hasn't been a buy low trade target on this video. He's gotten a much more stable workload over the past several weeks. I was big on him heading into week 8. Obviously, I was wrong. I don't know what exactly happened with Kansas City, but they had a massive whiff game in week 8. Pacheco only had 8 carries in that game, and it was just a very unexplainable game. The only thing I can think of is that a couple hours before game time, we saw that Patrick Mahomes was going to play a flu game. I was hoping it was going to be a Michael Jordan type flu game. It was not that. It was not exactly that for Patrick Mahomes here. This is not much to worry about with the Chiefs. Nothing is going to change moving forward with how good of a player that Isaiah Pacheco is in fantasy and just the upside the offense has in fantasy football as a whole. You want players on this type of team at this time of the year. You want players on the best teams at this time of the year in fantasy football because they have the highest upside. And here's the thing with Isaiah Pacheco. He has established himself as the number 2 weapon in Kansas City. It goes Travis Kelce, and then it goes Isaiah Pacheco. That's what it is right now in Kansas City. So you might be able to catch someone down Isaiah Pacheco's workload that he showed. You could offer a guy like Derrick Henry, maybe Gabe Davis with him, for Isaiah Pacheco and Christian Kirk, both coming off of bad weeks. That's a move I would do right there. Again, similar to Kenneth Walker, you're not going to be able to trade a Ramondre Stevenson, Rachaad White, Brian Robinson level guy for Isaiah Pacheco. I'm not saying that, but you will be able to get a Derrick Henry type of deal done, like I just said. Maybe even send a Josh Jacobs, a Chris Olave away for Isaiah Pacheco and Zay Flowers. That's the type of move I would make right here because Isaiah Pacheco, when it's all said and done, is going to be a better fantasy back than both of those guys rest of season, and especially when it matters most. Number 5, Puka Akula of the Los Angeles Rams here. I'm trading for him, and it should not surprise you. Not one bit. I have been holding firm ground right here on Puka Akula's fantasy football value for weeks now. Since Cooper Kupp returned, I have been holding ground, and I have advised you guys to do the exact same thing. This is a second bad game with Cooper Kupp back. So you know what's going to happen. It happened after the first one. People are using it as vindication for them saying, yep, he's a sell high guy. You should have sold him. Now it's too late. Yeah, take advantage of those people because you want to buy him low right now. They're using confirmation bias to say that Puka Akula is not a good fantasy player. Well, here's what we know about this one right here. You look at numbers, he's had no less than 7 targets in any game since Cooper Kupp has returned. That is also the same as without Cooper Kupp. No less than 7 targets in any game for Puka Akula so far this year. Based on his target share and his target totals and his performance, with and without Cooper Kupp, he's the wide receiver 10 rest of the season for me. And that was recently updated, by the way. So if you can find someone who thinks he's a middle tier wide receiver 2, take advantage of that person right there. Send Jordan Addison, who will be without Kirk Cousins, for Puka straight up. Or you could package him together with a running back 2 situation right here. Or a guy like Breece Hall, Terry McLaurin for a Puka and a Joe Mixon type of deal. Puka Akula is a great wide receiver in fantasy football. Nothing changes. A bad week is going to happen. It's going to happen. Puka Akula sees the workload consistently, and he's got the upside. So let me know who you're actively targeting before Week 9 Fantasy Football and what questions you need answered before Week 9 Fantasy Football. And we've got another trade video for the fantasy playoffs coming up here at 2 p.m. Central today. So make sure to stay tuned for that video, and I'll see you there.